Hey everybody, I'm Matt Robinson. Welcome to the latest edition of the Writer's Block. Today I'm really happy to have Gina Vild, the co-author of The Two Most Important Days, How to Find Your Purpose and Live a Happier, Healthier Life. Gina is most recently served as Associate Dean and Chief Communications Officer at Harvard Medical School and held leadership roles in healthcare and government. Today she consults on brand leadership and crisis management and coaches individuals and groups on how to cultivate resilience, which I'm sure we could all use these days, so I'm really happy to have her. She's currently working on her second book, Roses in Winter, How to Cultivate Resilience During Difficult Times, which I'm sure we'll all be picking up. And she also writes 2 columns for Psychology Today magazine, one on resilience and another on happiness. I understand you had kind of a rough morning, so thank you for being resilient and joining us, Gina.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. See, this is the great attitude, always optimistic. So how did you get interested in the science of happiness and resilience?
Interestingly, it began as a Facebook post. My co-author, Sanjeev Chopra, was giving a talk on Dharma and happiness, and I posted on Facebook, this is what makes me happy. And I mentioned things like being in the middle of a great novel, or reconnecting with an old friend, or just sitting on the porch when it rains. And it sparked such an overwhelming response. And there were, I want to say, hundreds of people who responded about what made them happy. And that in turn led to a conversation about co-authoring a book on happiness.
We've actually had Sanjeev on the show.
Yes.
Do you follow his handful of nuts, cup of coffee, talk with a friend every day thing?
I do. Yeah. It's good advice.
Yeah,
it's good advice.
Yeah. So how did all that lead to the book?
So we began a conversation, and I had always yearned to be an author. When I believe in manifesting, and that's really an important part of happiness and resilience. And when I was 16 years old, on the eve of my birthday, I wrote about what my adult life might look like. And there was no reason to think it would go from here to there. And I wrote about what I would do with my life, what my profession might be, and that on the walls of my office, there were books I had written. And years later, I never told anyone that story, and years later, Sanjeev and I were talking about a book, and he said, we really should co-author a book together. And I said, you don't need me to write this book. And he said, yes. One of the only things in your life you haven't achieved that you desired was being an author. And he said, I'm going to help make that happen for you. And it was a fantastic process, and we were picked up by a wonderful literary agency in New York, and St. Martin's Press published it immediately when they saw the proposal. Wow. And that in turn led to the work I'm doing now on resilience.
That's not a bad record for your first book.
No, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful turn of events.
And he certainly knows the ins and outs of publishing. He did, 4 books during COVID alone?
Yeah, he did quite a few. He did quite a few, right, right.
So to get back to the topic, what is the importance of purpose for happiness and resilience and satisfaction in life?
Well, the question I would ask for those who are watching today is, do you know the why of your life? Do you know the why of your life? Like, what is it that gives you joy in getting up in the morning? And your purpose is really critical, because it's what creates growth when you have trauma and setbacks and disappointment. The ability to look at your life and say, I know why I'm here, and is my life about me? Is it about other people? And just having a very clear sense of what it is. And I actually, in the book I'm writing, I have an exercise for people who would like to find their purpose if they're not sure what it is. And a purpose does not have to be grand. A purpose could be quite simple. Do you know your purpose?
Well, I mean, in terms of my writing career, I mean, I wrote my first book to honor my late father, which, which, as challenging as publishing can be, it kind of sustained me through it. And I think, my purpose is, as a writer and an educator, to, use my skills to support other people. And that's, having these author conversations is really great, because I get to share great ideas with other people who've gone through similar situations and help them reach our audience and share their great ideas. So it all is kind of a piece of using what I have to support people who may or may not have those things. And apparently, I've been able to inspire some other people to share their stories, which has been really gratifying.
That's a wonderful purpose. And it's not too late to find your purpose. I love the story of Christopher Reeve, who, as you know, was a very well-known actor who had a tragic accident when he became a paraplegic. And it was in that state that he found his purpose. And he began a foundation. He created a foundation that helped others in that similar situation. And he said during that period, this is not the life I thought I would live, but it has hope, it has purpose, it has joy, it has laughter. And I just think it's a tremendous inspiration.
You talk a lot with you said that it's never too late. Mm-hmm. Is there particular advice you give people, maybe if they've been technologically replaced and kind of get depressed about, I can't feed my family. What are some things that maybe for older people would be additional advice, additional encouragement to help them keep searching for their purpose, and that it isn't too late?
Well, I think there's an exercise you can do if you're not clear what your purpose is. And your purpose can change over time. So when you're young, it can have one focus, and when you're older, it can be different. And so the exercise that I recommend is that for 1 month, every activity that you do throughout the day, put it on an index card. So if you're volunteering somewhere, if you're going to work and doing a specific project, if you're doing something with your children, every activity has a separate card. And at the end of the month, you rank all the activities in terms of what gives you pleasure. And there's 1 through 10, and throw away 7 through 1. And look at very hard 8, 9, 10. And somewhere in those cards, you will find your purpose, because it is what gives you that ability to flourish and what brings you joy. And when you're doing things that make you happy and bring joy, that's where your purpose is. My purpose is very simple. My purpose is to show up, to be there for other people, to pay attention, and like you, to tell about it, to write, and to help other people, to inspire them in some way to flourish and to find their better selves.
What do you say to people who might say, it's not practical, I have to do a job that I don't really love in order to have the things I want or to support other people, or are pragmatism and purpose at odds with each other?
No, because your purpose does not need to be your work. I mean, we all have to do things we don't necessarily like to do, right? All of us, there's no one escapes that. I mean, we're lucky if we get 90%, but I think your purpose can be separate from that. Your purpose can be volunteering. You invited me to speak to a senior center in Needham, and I left that day after meeting with those wonderful people with such a full heart. And that inspired me and gave me purpose. And it had nothing to do really with the work I was doing or my profession. I felt very fortunate because my profession aligned with my purpose. But if it doesn't, you can still find things that give you pleasure. And sometimes purpose can be about putting beauty in your life and putting beauty into the world, because beauty brings joy. Beauty feeds your soul. And that it can be something as simple as that. It can be fundraising for an organization. I've worked with Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, and that's a wonderful organization to help those who are food insecure. I'm on another board, the Third Act Quest, which helps women at their third act of life figure out what brings them happiness and joy and creates a path forward for them.
With all, I mean, the science of happiness has become quite an industry.
Yes.
How were you and Sandeep able to find a new niche, a new path for your work together?
Yeah, all the books are wonderful. I've read many of them, and I applaud the authors. And there's a wonderful program at Yale and now Harvard Business School, which actually teaches people how to be happier. What we did is we tried to bring not only a sort of specific focus to happiness, but we brought ancient wisdom and practical exercises. We have a number of exercises in the book, and my book on resilience will also have that. I have a quiz in it to help people evaluate their resilience, and then there are exercises that you can do to boost your resilience. And when you talk about resilience, has there ever been a need for it greater than right now? right?
Yeah.
So the Centers for Disease Control has identified stress as the epidemic of this century. And why are we stressed, right? What's causing stress? Well, number one, it's work. Work creates the greatest amount of stress. And do you know which day people have the most heart attacks?
Tuesday?
No, Monday.
Monday, okay.
And the least heart attacks?
Friday.
Saturday.
Saturday. All right.
Saturday.
Day off.
And it's because there's stress. And beyond that, there's political discourse. We're in a very tragic time with what's happening with world events now. It is just heartbreaking to follow the news at every level. We just came out of a global pandemic where 6 million people died. And when you step down into the day-to-day life, people are experiencing divorce and betrayal and job setbacks, and people are aging, right? Oh, and then there's holiday planning.
Oh,
so there's all of that. So the need for resilience, to learn how to be resilient, is really critical, and it's probably never been more important than at this particular time in our history.
So what are some of the key factors? I mean, a lot of people are really at bottom for all of the reasons,
Right.
and more. How can people see the light and have hope that they can turn it around? What are some of the real baby steps that they can start with?
Well, I think two things first. There has to be a general understanding. And I think the first point that I make in terms of the understanding is that there is no escape from suffering. It's universal. All of us have setbacks. Some people have large trauma, some people have small trauma. We have big disappointments, we have small disappointments. And there's research now that is showing that people who experience small traumas early in life, say bullying in school, can carry that trauma with them that can manifest as great as a large trauma. And so that is the need. And to accept that, as the Buddha says, there's no escape from suffering. We have to accept that. And then I think the second point is that we should learn to suffer well. And by suffering well, I mean that learning the skills to grieve. And it's just as important as tying your shoe and learning long division. Because knowing you're going to have setbacks, what do you do with it? So learning the process in which to deal with it. And I recommend a number of areas. I don't know that we would have time to talk about all of them, but number one is mindfulness. Mindfulness, and I have exercises that lead to that. Gratitude is critical. And I spoke recently to cancer survivors as part of a keynote talk, and we talked at length about gratitude and how you could find gratitude even in times when you are uncertain about your future and there's fear. You learn to navigate a new path. That's really important. Living with purpose is another one. And probably one of the most critical ones is learning community. So the people in your life are probably the greatest determinant of your happiness and your resilience. So one of the exercises, Jim Rohn, the motivational speaker, said, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And for those who are listening to this, I suggest you make a list. Who are those 5 people outside of your children and your parents and your spouse that you might spend the time with? Because you're choosing those people. And then my exercise for how you build resilience through community is to look at those 5 people and ask yourself, are they feeding my soul? What do we talk about? Do we talk about positive things? Do we talk about negative things? Are they people who are bringing you down or lifting you up? Do they see you? Do they value you? Do they add to your life in a way that's really important and is allowing you to thrive? And if they're not, you need to really restructure that in some way. And I think that friendship piece is really important. Nicholas Christakis, with whom I worked at Harvard, and he is now, I believe, at Yale, he's published quite extensively about the role of friendship in your life and how your weight, whether you vote, how you vote, what your conversations are, all of that is related to the people that you choose to put in your life.
Yeah, to your point about resilience and preparing, when pardon me, my father was diagnosed with dementia, I had time to kind of prepare, and I joined support groups, and I was doing gratitude journals. Even as he was kind of going away, I would visit him every day, and I would try to find something that was still there, and it certainly helped me on the back end. And I know that as unfortunate situation, I was fortunate in being able to kind of be ready for it, that it wasn't sudden and unexpected.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so that that and then doing the book, like I said, because publishing was frustrating, but just that the book had a purpose. It wasn't just because I wanted to do it as a vanity press thing. I was doing it, in his honor, and that's kind of sustained me. So kind of along those lines, on a more positive note, one of my favorite parts about these talks and talking about my book is the stories that people share with me that come into their minds as we're talking. What are some of the most profound and uplifting stories of resilience that you've heard? I know that you speak extensively on the topic.
I've been blessed to have so many people share their story with me. Well, one that has really touched me is a woman I interviewed who, when she was 16, she was diagnosed with cancer and given a prognosis of 12 to 18 months, as I recall. And during that period, she found herself pregnant. And her oncologist advised her to terminate the pregnancy and said, "You will not be here to see this child born." And she refused, and she said those words were more traumatic to her than getting the cancer diagnosis. Today, that child is a daughter, and that daughter is 31 or 2 years old, and the woman I interviewed, who will be in the book, she's still struggling with her health, but she's been there to raise her child.
That's amazing.
And I think that is just tremendous. There was another woman I interviewed who had a different kind of trauma. She was 16 years old, and she's probably in her 60s now, and she had a car accident at a time when she was really going to figure out her future and thrive, and she had a major setback in high school, so she couldn't do what everyone else was doing. But she is quite articulate about how that setback, which was devastating at the time, really enabled her to rethink her life, and she became the person she is today. And she's quite accomplished and quite successful, and she can draw the threads all the way back to that accident. I interviewed a man who's in his, I think he's probably in his late 50s, early 60s now, and he was abused by a priest as a teenager. And when I interviewed him, I asked him what his process was, because he's just wildly successful and just a wonderful, ebullient person now. And he said, he talked about his process and eventually how he said he had to forgive himself. And I thought I misheard, and I said, "You mean you forgave the person who did this to you?" And he said, "No, that's irrelevant. You have to forgive yourself and allow yourself to go forward so you're not holding on to that." So in my book I'm writing quite extensively about forgiveness and how important that is, to not hold grudges and to let them go, because forgiveness is really a gift, as he so well described, where it's a gift you give to yourself, right? In
Holding
Lebanon,
a grudge just eats away at you. The other person may not even know.
Yeah, it's often said it's like holding a hot coal and thinking it's going to hurt the other person. And there's a wonderful website called The Forgiveness Project where people post about stories of forgiving the unforgivable. And in Lebanon, there is a forgiveness garden, and they suffered terribly with the war. And it's a tribute to being able to forgive and stop the horrors and move forward. So it's just, the stories are just phenomenal. Another woman I interviewed, she lost everything in Hurricane Harvey, and she just watched everything swept away, all her cherished belongings, and she survived. And she survived with gratitude, and in the midst of losing everything and worrying about her pets and her husband, she was out there trying to organize and save her neighbors and get them into rowboats and get them to safety. So people inspire with their stories. You know, I'm just enthralled, and I'm honored that people are willing to share them. And if people have stories to share, I would invite people to reach out. I'm happy to share my contact. I'd love to talk to people about their stories.
Well, just so we don't miss it, what's the best way to
The best way to reach me is through my email. It's Gina, Gina, Vild, Vild, @gmail.com.
Easy enough. There
Yeah.
you go. So I also used to do a column about people who changed careers dramatically. My own grandfather worked in his family mattress business for many years, retired, got bored, taught himself picture framing of all things, and has techniques that I've never seen duplicated. Unfortunately, I didn't have the acumen to carry on the torch. But what are some of the most profound transitions you've seen, like what the person's first job was and then where they ended up?
In terms of professionally, I'm not sure, but you're just reminding me. I'd love to share a story. This was a personal story, and it's an exercise that's in my book. But in 2015, I went through a really devastating transition with a divorce that really would make a Netflix miniseries. And I was really lost, and I tend to be fairly positive and ebullient, and I was lost, and I didn't know how to get back on my path to remember who I was and to figure out what was my life going to look like. I was very late in life to be experiencing this, and even though it was something I chose, and it was really painful. So everyone had advice, but none of it was working. So I decided I would ask the smartest person I know how to mend my broken heart. And I did. I asked Google. I asked Google how to mend my broken heart. And the exercise actually was transformative. And I will share it because I think you don't have to go through a trauma that large, but if you're grieving in any capacity, a job, a relationship, a friendship, a person, issues with your children going off to school, this works. And so Google said two things. Google said, number one, write a goodbye letter to yourself. And I was going to do anything my new best friend told me to do. So I sat on my porch with a martini, and I wrote for hours, and I wrote a farewell to everything that would never be, all the hopes, the plans, the dreams, and it was extraordinarily painful. And I was exhausted from crying and writing at the end of it. And then taking Google's advice, I waited a couple days, and I did part two. And part two was writing a hello letter to my new life, and that was harder. And I wrote about and began to think about all the new chapters and what might be possible and what could I create out of the opportunities that were presented with, you know, unstructured time and new relationships and maybe perhaps even finding love again, which I did, I'm happy to say. And it was just the most therapeutic experience that came from such an unlikely source, right? But the reason it worked is because it really is aligned with the grieving process. Because when you grieve, whatever you're saying goodbye to, it's not necessarily death, it could be, but it could be you feel it fully, you surrender to it, and you accept it and hold it into your body and grieve as deeply as you can. And then when that happens, you've absorbed it and you begin to look forward and you begin to manifest. And that is a really wonderful process for moving forward no matter what occurs in your life.
So speaking of chapters in your life, a little more about the new book, and is it of a piece with the old ones? Is it a continuation? Is it for a different, slightly different audience? How they relate?
I think the audience for both is really broad. I mean, we found, and it was interesting, I will share how that actually came to be, the resilience talk, in that after the happiness book came out and we were giving many, many interviews and we were giving talks in libraries and we had quite a few invitations, and then COVID hit. And suddenly we were forced onto Zoom, and a number of opportunities came up through Zoom. And people said at the end of these talks that I gave at senior centers and to community groups all over the country, because Zoom made that possible, right? they said, "Do you have anything else? Can you come back?" So I began to give talks on grief and then on resilience. And the reason resilience really became pivotal is the questions that I was asked in the happiness talks, almost all of them began leading to the theme of resilience. And how do I be happy again? How do I survive? How do I manage the adversity in my life? And we all have it. And I learned as much as I taught from the people who shared. And there's a lot of research. There's tremendous research. And if I have time, I'd love to share, like, are you lucky? Do you consider yourself lucky?
I'd say so.
Okay. So I wrote an article for Psychology Today on luck. And why are some people lucky and other people not lucky? And there are researchers in England who've done a lot of work on this, and people who are lucky say yes a lot. They say yes to new opportunities. They say yes when they're invited to things, and it's the basic odds. You say yes enough, you're going to have good things and bad things come your way, but those opportunities present luck. So there's also a way to become a luckier person.
I'd say, do you feel lucky too?
I do.
And
I feel very lucky.
Do you feel happy?
I am happy. I accept the ebbs and flows, but I find my way back to happiness.
So you practice what you preach, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah, you're living proof.
One more exercise. Do I have time?
Real
okay.
fast.
Very quickly, one exercise for anyone who wants a jump start on being happier. And this is something I've done my whole life. When you fall asleep at night, don't ruminate about the world. Remember something positive and happy that happened during the day. And there is science behind this, that reliving happy memories literally boosts your happiness. It works.
It does work.
Yeah.
And if you need more help boosting your happiness, look for Gina's books, The 2 Most Important Days, and the forthcoming Roses in Winter, How to Cultivate Resilience During Difficult Times, which, as we've discussed, everyone could use. But hopefully this was not a difficult time for you. Hopefully it wasn't for you, Gina. It's so great to have you here, and great to have you all here on the Writer's Block. We'll see you next time.